Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 18th, 2022. Time for another week of shows and Rafto stories, as a matter of fact. We're back with our live shows this week. We were last week, but only for the second half of the week. And I guess the biggest topic for me over the weekend was fielding emails from people who are having difficulty getting their usual service of the podcast for the last couple of days. Apparently, I don't know, I think there was some kind of disconnect between Libsyn and the various podcast platforms that, what do we say, scrape, I guess, the podcast data from Libsyn, or to whom Libsyn serves up the data. I think the ones to which Libsyn directly serves the data, like YouTube, have gotten the podcast regularly. So if you're looking for a consistent place where you can always download the show, Libsyn itself or the YouTube channel will have them for you. But I was fielding, questions and, not complaints, but questions, concerns from concerned listeners, because that's who has the concerns. The people who are concerned about other things and don't listen, they are concerned about other things, and they didn't write to me. But let's see, the Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher wasn't serving them. There are 2 or 3 other platforms that were named that I can't recall right away that also weren't serving them up. And I'll state for the record, for those of you who are saying, oh yeah, I had that problem too. Starting after, I think, the 11th of last week. Well, not the 11th of last week, 11th of the month, but you know what I'm talking about. They began having difficulty getting the shows served up to them, and I'm not sure what it was, and I'm not certain that it hasn't ended at this point either. I think around the same time, Libsyn appeared to have a sort of a crash in their statistics routine, and they were working on some repairs. Perhaps, they unplugged something somewhere that undid it. They haven't owned up to anything yet, and I don't know whether they know, but probably by now people have pointed this out. So they may be looking around to see whether they did anything or not. Or, I don't know. It's also possible. The problem with the way podcasts are distributed across these platforms is I don't have any deal with Google or Apple, or I guess I once did have a deal with Stitcher. But basically these places are independent. And when they make changes to the way they gather up the podcasts, they don't tell me about it. I only find out about it if that's what happens. When people say, hey, I can't get it anymore. And sometimes they just restart, and sometimes there are problems with Libsyn, and even at Libsyn, I'll send in a ticket, we'll see what happens. But at any rate, I guess I would say, if you're looking for the most consistent delivery, you can perhaps sign up for the RSS feed, the old technology, the RSS feed at Libsyn. Or you can just stumble across the old Libsyn website and play things from there. Simple enough. I guess that's the easiest of the addresses to remember. YouTube could have been simpler, but I screwed that up. But let's see. At Libsyn, just kagrox.libsyn, Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, if that helps you remember it. So kagrox.libsyn.com brings you to the web page that they give to you as a subscriber, and they also automatically, when you go through their posting service, they line it all up, so it's all posted. Never misses at Libsyn, because that's the original publication site. So you can always do that. They have a little routine where you can click on buttons and sign up for an RSS feed, and it'll go right to your email, etc., things like that. Over at YouTube, I think. Actually, if you go to YouTube, just the YouTube site, and you search for Kagro in the Morning, you'll get a list of the shows, but it won't take you directly to the page, because I don't have a Kagro in the Morning page. I probably should have done that. Probably could still do that. That's probably not taken over at YouTube. But then I have to move the whole collection over. That might be easy. I don't know. Anyway, at one point when I discovered, oh yeah, you can put things on YouTube. Don't I have a YouTube account somewhere? And I went to get it, and I figured I had like a Kagro X YouTube account, and I think I did. And then it was, I don't know, somehow I guess I probably lost the password to it or something like that. And I had to create a new page, and I was, trying to name the page, and it wasn't working, and all the names I wanted were gone or whatever or something, and I ended up naming the page, I just want to upload stuff. Get out of my way, please. I just want to upload something. So I think I actually have that page, like at YouTube. My page for it is tagged, just wanna, WANNA. Just want to upload stuff. Anyway, if you search for Kagro in the Morning, you'll find the individual shows, and then I think up at the top of the list that it will display will be a link to the page itself, and then you could subscribe to the page. Makes it pretty easy. I know a lot of people listen to podcasts when they're on the go, and they want to listen on their phone, not on their laptop, so you can always find it there. I'll hammer Libsyn and see what's going on. That's the big news, I think, internationally. Ukrainians, I think, feel safer knowing that they can go to Libsyn now. It solves all the problems. Middle East peace has broken out, so that's fantastic. The former guy is being prosecuted for sure. And I don't know, inflation's down and gas costs less, and matzah is delicious. All of a sudden, all the problems in the world have been taken care of. So, happy Easter to all, except who, the Eastern who have to wait until next week. We'll wish them happy Easter then. I don't know why they don't want to move it up a little bit, but Gregorian calendar, I guess, whatever. But Greg Dworkin is here because it's Greg Dworkin Monday as well as Easter Monday. So, fantastic. Who could ask for more? Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I was just looking at the YouTube page, which is what I often use on my phone when I'm on the go because it's just easiest to find.
Right.
It's just want to upload stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you ever did just want to upload stuff.com and, just made something out of it.
Yeah, no, that would be empire building, and I'm anti-imperialist, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, speaking of empire building, there's good news that I thought we should start off with today.
Oh.
Although I have to tell you, I was getting questions about the feed for the Kagro in the Morning show as well.
Well, I'm glad.
And my answer was, I don't know. I
didn't
work here. If you could consider calling one of my friends a couple times a week work, but I don't know. I don't know anything about the technical stuff. I'm not the one that calls California at 5 a.m. when we all of a sudden want to do a spontaneous show.
Right. I don't either. But I don't know anything about it. It's all so automatic that, I sign up, I do the things. There's clearly a problem, and it was a very interesting thing. I mean, at first I'm like, well, now I'm really frustrated. All these people are upset. And I'm working on it and trying to find out what's going on. But then it was sort of like, well, there's a silver lining to this. Look at how many people are upset if they can't get this show. This is actually kind of good news. Bad news for them, but we'll get them the shows. But this is nice. Everybody said, look,
YouTube
I'm upset.
is not my
Where's
favorite
my thing?
platform, but YouTube is awfully reliable, and it's easy to find.
It's pretty good. Occasionally, there's a
because,
discount
if you search
between
Kagro, they aren't that many of them.
Right. There's the Korean American Grocers Association. I don't think they have a YouTube page. They could. It wouldn't be very exciting, I don't think. Who knows? They could be very creative. But, there is that. And as it happens, it's pretty easy. Once you use it on your computer or your phone, I guess, for that matter, if you don't delete all your browsing history, kagrox.libsyn.com, as soon as you put in the K, for the most part, that's going to come up. And then you just, that's the one I'm looking for. It's pretty simple to remember. They never miss because I upload the file directly to them. There's no handoff.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
YouTube
Well, speaking of empires, let's start off with some very good news.
Yeah.
This is from Reuters this morning. Alex Jones InfoWars files for bankruptcy in U.S. court. Because so many people are suing him.
Don't give it to them. Just take the money.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that Jones goes away. But what's happened is that when you get cut off from your platforms, which is quite relevant to the discussion we were just having, when you get cut off from your platforms, you don't have the revenue stream you did because it's harder for you to hawk your phony supplement business.
Hawk your phony.
So you don't have as much money. And so now he can't afford to fight all these suits that he's losing.
Good.
And of course, this doesn't mean that he's silenced. Free speech, say his, followers. Well, actually, free speech applies to the government, not private concerns. And the fact of the matter is, all this is saying there's an actual price that can be put on lying. He claims that he only has assets in the range of $0 to $50,000.
Well, that's good. I mean, he could be
and
lying,
liabilities in the range of $1 to $10 million.
Aha.
And I like the liability side of that. And so the point is, there is a price to lying. It's between $1 and $10 million. And you're free to say whatever you want, but you're on notice that you're going to get sued again.
I thought it was supposed to be free, though. Now it's costing me money. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, well, so that's definitely good news. And no, we're not naive enough to think that this just makes InfoWars go away. But again, you're on notice. Clean up your act, or this will happen again over and over and over, and that's fine.
Yeah. Well, good. I hope that he. Well, yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with bankruptcy procedure. But I guess now he's petitioning
it means your creditors can't collect money, so that you have an opportunity to reorganize your finances.
Right. So I guess I hope he loses that case somehow. I don't know what I'm not a bankruptcy person, but I would like to find out that, the court is not protecting you at all. You're going to lose it all. None of this shielding, but I think everybody gets that. So at some level, corporations, of course, and wealthy people do much better. But anyway, I hope it destroys them. Yay. I mean, I guess.
Speaking of corporations and wealthy people, this was sort of interesting and mildly amusing to me, who's a longtime New York Times reader. Well, I'll tell you why. This is Kendra Pierre-Louis,
Hi,
who is a writer.
Hello.
And had an interesting tweet thread April 17th. So that was recent. It was last night. Anyway, my perspective, she says, in recent years as to what's wrong with a lot of newsrooms is not that they don't know history or science or whatever it is I didn't understand. What I didn't understand is that it was about power.
Yeah, okay.
The class interests of many of the people who run or own newsrooms is generally in line with the business and political class. I mean, James Bennett, the ex-New York Times opinion editor, basically said as much. He said, I think we are pro-capitalism. The New York Times is in favor of capitalism because it has been the greatest engine, the greatest anti-poverty program and engine of progress that we've seen. So many national journalists either come from similar wealth or pursue journalism because they're chasing proximity to power. I didn't understand this for too long. The idea of media as power is why so many affluent people try to control newsrooms or defang them. The whole VC takeover. Think Elon Musk and Twitter.
Yes. Maybe.
It's also why so many Silicon Valley types love media until they started asking questions about the implications of tech.
Yes. All right. That's a good
So if you're wondering why media doesn't do X, it's worth taking a step back and not asking what they don't know, but could with a basic Google search, but rather what power structure is that in service to? And she gives some examples. But, to me, in our discussion, of course, is why does the New York Times cover the Ukraine war as if Russia's bound to win? And to me, the answer is because their sources are the blob, the Washington in power and out of power but want to be in power wannabes who form foreign policy, and their opinion is that Russia's going to win. Because we told you that. We predicted that Ukraine would fold in 2 or 3 days. We can't be wrong. And so since we're the source of the New York Times information, they're going to ask us because, we're like those who are at or might be in power soon, and they like to keep in touch with us. They're not going to turn to completely independent experts, except rarely. When they do, they get it right. And so that's why you can find so much more information on Twitter and other sources besides our papers of record.
Yes,
in my view,
it makes a great deal of sense, the theory, and there's a lot of alternative reasons for bits and pieces of it. But I mean, it's not a bad framework to start with. It makes a certain amount of sense, of course. If there's a foreign affairs event, you would go to and you're a newspaper and a big, the paper of record. You're going to go to people about whom it is said these are experts. You'll start
And also,
there.
you already know because you had them on for some other story, a couple of months ago, and they'll remember you, and they'll answer your email.
Yep. Your Rolodex is what, the old
That's
thing.
what we used to
call
have
it. That, right. Now,
in the days of mimeographs.
Yes, and I once called this person, and they gave me a thing, and I didn't get fired, so I'll ask them again. Right. And, you could expand your horizons, it's true, but you also have a deadline, and, there's a lot of things.
So we're going to concentrate on a lot of the non-media Twitter experts for our Ukraine roundup, because a lot of interesting stuff in there going on. But more good news before we get to that. Right. Ipsos Sopra Steria survey, according to Deutsche Welle, which is the German outlet, found that Macron enjoys support of 55.5% of the respondents. Marine Le Pen could count on 44.5%. So he's got an 11-point lead.
Okay.
Nothing is decided, according to Macron, which is good. And he's going to be protesting, trying to get Greens and socialists to vote for him, even though he's a business guy. And proudly and obnoxiously a business guy, and trying to get the socialists to vote for him by concentrating on climate change and the environment.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying he was protesting their doing so, but he wants it, obviously, I guess, right? He wants votes.
Right.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting in that regard. Macron's already secured backing of his predecessor, center-right Nicolas Sarkozy, and socialist François Hollande. But Macron's centrist, pro-business position is a hard sell among socialists, says the article. On Friday, the party publicly declared their stance with a slogan. That's Socialist Party, I suppose. We all want to say merde, but we have to vote for Macron. That's their slogan.
That's a good slogan, I think. The kids should love it. They want to say merde? Okay.
Macron is also likely to gain support from leftist activists who view populist Le Pen as a danger to democracy and liberalism. There are student protests going on saying we should all be neutral because they all stink. And you have to wonder how much of that is funded by Russia. I'm sorry, but you have to ask because this is 2022 and these things matter.
That's a good question.
Over half of Mélenchon's voters, he's the third place winner who came just behind Le Pen and almost supplanted her. But half of his voters still don't have a preferred candidate. Those who do, 33% Macron and 16% Le Pen. So he'll pick up voters from the Mélenchon vote, which ought to be enough to secure his victory. The size of the victory will matter. Nothing's taken for granted, as he says, but it looks better now than it did last week.
All right. Well, good. I hope
there's one last debate on Wednesday. She's a terrible debater. He's a good debater. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. I don't know how to.
One of the reasons why he won by so much last time they ran off against each other is that she bombed the debate.
Not.
And there was only one of them.
Not the explosive way.
Well, you can't tell with her, but in generally, she didn't do that well.
All right. Well, good.
So that's good news. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And speaking of international, let's turn a little bit to Ukraine here. And let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening right in front of our eyes. That was the theme of my pundit roundup this morning. I call it the illustrative war. The illuminated war in Ukraine, because it's all there, like in real time, right? Open source intelligence, OSINT intel is telling us what's going on. Here's a map. Here's what happened last night. This is where the Ukrainian forces are. This is where the Russian forces are. Here's what the Russians' plan is. Here's what the Ukrainians' plan is. Okay, so now that we know everything, let's wait 13 hours and see what. Okay, this is exactly what we thought would happen because there's no secrets here. It's not like a surprise attack, caught them by surprise as they outflank them. That's not happening here. Yeah, it's all out in the open where everybody can see it.
They tell us sometimes one side or another might be exaggerating or lying, but we have satellites and.
Well, they argue about facts, but there's no question about the facts.
Yeah, well, if you
the
can see
Moskva
pictures of
was
things
hit.
blowing up.
Well, it was hit by a internal fire because Russian sailors were smoking the boys' room, and then the all the powder and the munitions went off, and Ukraine had nothing to do with it.
Like
and
a
Ukraine
cartoon.
said, no, we did it. And it doesn't matter. The point is it was hit, and everybody knows it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're still spending time on the weekend news shows saying, well, the Russians do say it was a different thing, so we got to at least consider that.
Right. Go back to what I said before in terms of how this is covered. Why are they saying that?
Yeah, I don't.
Who cares? Well, they have to defend the blob who wants to make sure everything is both sides because you have to put this in diplomatic. And Biden says, look, the guy's a killer, and he's a war criminal, and this is genocide. Oh, you can't say it. Well, I just said it.
Yeah. Cannot. Oh, all right. Yeah, I don't know why they're. I don't know who they thought would believe that this is like one of those, like a cartoon.
Well, what if we go back
There's
to the
powder
negotiating
kegs.
table? We have to make sure we didn't completely and totally insult. We're not going back to the negotiating table until the Ukrainians win. Get that through your thick skulls.
Or I guess until they all lose, and then. But they're gonna.
There's
settle
no
this out.
interest right now in negotiating.
Right.
Okay, so if that's what you do for a living, find another job.
Yeah. I understand the assumption early that would go that way because it looks for all the world at the outset
what do you want?
Russia's
them
going
to
to
admit
overwhelm
they were wrong? That doesn't happen.
Oh, well.
So
I'll
here's
admit
Ilya
that they were wrong. How about that?
Matviv writing on Twitter, and he's citing a retired colonel with the Russian General Staff, whose name is Mikhail Kodrynov.
Okay. Retired, huh?
Retired colonel.
All right.
I sometimes feel like this is like the Southern Army in the Civil War, where like everybody was a colonel.
It's all honorary.
Right. With
So
the
you get
Russians,
thrown out a
everybody's a
window.
colonel.
Okay.
And then there's one marshal, and that's Putin.
Right. General Gogol, though, from
Mikhail Kodrynov, a retired colonel with the Russian General Staff, currently working as an analyst, writing 3 weeks before the war. 3 weeks before the war, he says all of this.
Really?
One,
Okay.
no one in Ukraine will happily greet Russian troops in case of the invasion. Number
says
two,
obvious.
Russia has no capability to destroy the Ukrainian military and thus end the war with one missile attack. Doesn't work that way.
Oh.
3, there's only 7. The war will not end quickly because of Russia's air supremacy. Russia lost in Afghanistan and Chechnya despite having 0 planes on the other side. And Ukraine does have an air force and they have air defenses. Number 4, Ukrainian forces have undergone massive reform since 2014 and are very capable. The West will supply them with weapons on the scale of a new Lend-Lease program. This is before the war.
Good call, then.
The resistance to the invasion will be particularly successful in big cities where smaller defending force has multiple advantages.
Okay.
Number 6, even if significant territories are occupied, and consider this, when they finally announce that Mariupol has finally fallen, the guerrilla resistance will be fierce. The Soviet forces have been fighting nationalist guerrillas in western Ukraine for more than 10 years after the end of the Second World War. The bottom line, no blitzkrieg, and those who say otherwise will be deeply embarrassed. So that's 7 out of 7 for him.
All right. Was he right on all fronts?
Yeah.
Trump is excited. Guerrillas. He likes the guerrilla channel.
Oh, guerrillas, yeah.
Well,
so Phillips O'Brien,
listen to
which
that
is
guy
one of the
then,
people that I cite frequently as a military expert, and interesting, I see more and more of the experts
Yes, I do
otherwise
remember.
that I follow also citing him, kind of validating why we do this,
Good. That's helpful.
has this interesting thread. Well, this is interesting, he said. See, it's interesting. He says right up front. It's
I knew it.
I knew it was interesting. Ukrainian armed forces report that Ukrainian forces are pushing out from Kharkiv. Okay, so I have to set them. I sent you a picture from another thread that we'll cover on this.
Oh.
But imagine this small, mental picture here. All right.
Yeah.
At the top is Belgorod. Just draw a circle like midway top of map
Okay.
in the north. And then for the purpose of this discussion, Izium in Ukraine, because Belgorod is in Russia, Izium is at the bottom of the map, and draw a circle around that. So that just connect them with a line. So it looks like a barbell standing on its end.
Okay, I guess, yes.
All right, Belgorod at the top, Izium at the bottom. To the left and in the middle of the barbell is Kharkiv.
All right.
All right.
Why not?
So when Kharkiv moves to the right, moves east, and cuts the barbell in half. Those are Ukrainian forces because they control the city.
Yes, right, gotcha.
They've cut off Izium supply lines from Belgorod in Russia where they're being supplied from.
All right.
Seems like a simple maneuver.
Yes.
The Russians didn't plan for it.
Oh.
So
they figured they
take a look below,
I guess.
and the village of Bazalyaka is right in the middle there, cutting off the barbell.
Okay.
And the armed forces of Ukraine starts counterattack in the Kharkiv region. The settlements of Vasylyivka, Lebze, part of Kutuzivka have been liberated, Kharkiv region official says. And this is the road heading right to the crucial road systems from Belgorod to Izium. This is opening up a possibly major problem for the Russian army. He said this a day ago. If this can be confirmed, it's something to watch closely, and apparently this is exactly what's happening. If it helps, here's a map. It's basically this village is directly between Belgorod and Izium.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and here's another report. Kyiv Independent. Governor says Ukrainian troops counterattack near Kharkiv. They've liberated these villages, and a counterattack into the Russian supply lines after letting the Russians get strung out, reaching down to Izium, is exactly the Ukrainian way of war.
It is now.
So the whole point is that isn't an accident. It is exactly what's happening, and he makes the point as we go into our break, the Donbas seems to be developing more like the Battle of Kyiv Round 2 than an example of the Russian army learning and adapting.
Oh.
We'll talk more about that after the break.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is an interesting map, and I'm looking at the roads are on the map. This might be like a Google map or something like that. It has the familiar-looking pin, and it doesn't look like there's any roads from in between those that don't lead through Kharkiv. So I guess they were bound. You'd think that would be obvious as a pressure point, but you know, I'm not a Russian military expert. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm checking Google Maps to see if there are some back roads that they could be taking. I guess there are. Looks like it's a bit of a lake district there too, so you got to go around bodies of water. It's nothing that doesn't run through a town somewhere where they can just lie in wait and blow up the 2-lane road. It's rough going, and you can't. Well, even if their vehicles were working, it doesn't look like you could really do it effectively off road. There's a lot of water in the way,
So the Department of War
tough.
Studies at King's College London has a visiting fellow by the name of Dr. Mike Martin, who tweets as Threshed Thought. Mike Martin has this thread. The battle in Donbas seems to have started, but it's the Ukrainians who have started it. Remember, I've been telling you, like for a week, that the New York Times keeps writing about Russians massing, Russians getting ready to attack, Russians ready to do this, Russians ready to do that, as if the Ukrainians are just sitting back doing nothing, and the Russians are massing for this Soviet-style tank battle, which may never take place. Part of the problem, as people have been pointing out, maybe we'll get to that today in some of the expert commentary, is that instead of massing their forces and then doing a combined air, sea, land assault, which is what the U.S. would do and many NATO countries would do, whatever they get, they throw in. It gets chewed up. They get more. They throw it in. They're throwing in the stuff that came down from Kyiv and went around Russia. and then showed up in the South, and they throw those in, even though they aren't ready to fight, and they get chewed up. And so, it doesn't matter how many times you do that, you're still going to lose. So here's Mike Martin. Ukrainians have started it, and there's the expertly drawn map that I was referring to, where it's Belgorod in the north,
yes,
Isium in the south, and breaking out from Kharkiv, Ukraine is cutting off that supply line. The Ukrainians are pushing east from Kharkiv, which cuts the supply routes for Russian forces in Isium. And if you remember from a few days ago, the Russians took Isium, and that was important. It's a transport hub, which makes it easier for the Russians in the northeast to link up to this in the Mariupol direction, and the start of an encirclement of Ukrainian forces in the Donbas. But it appears the Russians have overstretched themselves over supply lines they can't defend, and so the Ukrainians are merrily cutting those supply lines. Now, if you only read the New York Times, that'll come as a surprise to you.
Okay.
You weren't prepared for this because they weren't talking about this. But an encirclement of an encirclement, if you like, I suppose this is the consequence of having a fixed date, May 9th, to wrap everything up by. That's Victory Day in Russia. And so the scuttlebutt is Putin wanted to declare victory by May 9th after he couldn't have it in the first few days. We've seen this before in the battle for Kyiv. Russians push too far on unrealistic political goals and get their log tails cut. They've learned nothing. Watch this space. This sort of movement, coupled with credible reports of Ukrainian reinforcements and reports of Russian losses, seems to indicate the war is still not going Russia's way, which takes me back to my original prediction. The Russian armed forces will be defeated in Ukraine and Putin will be removed from power. It may take some time, but that's where we're going to wind up ending up. And I swear the Ukrainians are proper sick at strategy.
Proper sick?
Meaning, this is British.
Yeah.
Right? So they're good at it. I want them on my side in any future wars. The move gives the real lie to all those Russian claims of reconstitution of those forces that got mullered about in Kyiv. Where are they? There aren't any. Hey, look at this. The Ukrainians are pushing northeast, the other side of Isium, too. Look out for Russian forces being surrounded in Isium in the next 24 to 48 hours. It also, and that's what I mean about this all happening real time with
thinking
an illuminated, illustrated war. It appears that Mariupol is going to fall over the same time period, 24 to 48 hours, but it's done its job. It kept the Russians tied up, enabling the Ukrainians to stage a counterattack.
Okay.
So, Thermopylae?
Oh.
I mean, there's going to be, Mariupol's going to be famous.
Yes. Well, it's already famous. And
Infamous famous.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how we hear that Russia's planning a referendum in Kherson to be held from May 1st to May 10th. And this would apparently be modeled on the BS referendum that was held in Crimea after the 2014 takeover. The residents of Kherson will vote to join Russia, and I'm sure the Russians will pre-fill out the ballot to make it easy for them. So in one sense, this referendum may be what Putin's going to cite as his victory on May 9th, because there's no other victories. But in another sense, it creates a danger because once the residents of Kherson have voted for independence or overlordship under Russia, whatever they vote for, and this has been publicized on Russian TV, that makes it even harder for Putin to row this back and ups the ante. And it means Putin is even more tied to this misadventure, and when it finally goes wrong, he'll have even less chance to save his skin. If I were the Ukrainians, I would do whatever I could to take Kherson, either that or create another Russian salient around it like Isium. And from fighting around Kherson, this is Canadian-Ukrainian volunteer. I know everybody's eagerly waiting for the news of a full-scale offensive on Kherson. Ukrainians are holding the city, but they're surrounded, especially those who are in occupied Kherson. We know things are not easy for you. Having said that, the main difficulties are terrain, open horizon to horizon with barely any places for infantry to hide, let alone mechanized equipment. So the plan for now is simple. We continue to drain Russian ammo supplies, equipment, deprive them of sleep at night, raid their lines, and in general degrade their combat ability until an opportunity presents itself, and it always does. And then several things will happen at once. Can't tell you about it, but hold on. So basically, Ukrainians have a war plan, is what he's saying. And they're executing it. And, it's the British and the colonials.
Okay.
The British are going to, march in formation wearing bright red suits, and the Americans get to hide behind trees and rocks because at the beginning of the war they decided those are the rules.
Yes, they had.
And the British have much stronger
Indians,
forces, and the Americans have morale, and the British really don't want to be there, and guess who's going to win?
Okay. There are no Hessians at this point. Nobody can bring them in. So that's helpful. Yeah, all right. No trees or fences to hide behind, I guess, in some of these places, as they say, open horizon.
Right, and that's why they're doing it very carefully, and that's why breaking out from places like Kharkiv and cutting off logistics is more sensible than a staged tank battle, which the Russians would win, and the Ukrainians refuse to play along.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll watch and wait. The road network, not terrific there, and you can see that they can't go off-road, and you see what happens when they stay on the road. And I keep looking at these maps and enlarging them now in Google just to see how would you get from one of these places to another. What's the distance between these two places? And
well, what's the travel time? Google will tell you.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to go from here to here. Give me my route.
There's 2 ways, right? There's like a major highway connection. If you wanted to go from the original play from Belgrade to Izium, if you stay on the highway, you can do it in 3 hours and no one blows you up and there's no tanks in the way. So it's a 3-hour drive time, 197 kilometers. However, that highway goes straight to and then around the outskirts of Kharkiv, which is a great way to get killed, I guess. There's another way, a back road way that the Google Maps offers up that swings east and stays far away from Kharkiv, but that is double the time. 4 hours and 31 minutes and 256
kilometers. Remember, all of this, as we've learned, is wear and tear on Russian equipment.
Yes. Plus, it takes forever to get Uber Eats delivered out there.
Plus, if it's raining, it's all muddy.
Right. And as I've said, it's very wet. It looks like there's a lot of water there all the time, I guess. And I don't know, this terrain looks would be pretty difficult to manage. I'll say that. There's rivers, there's lakes, bogs, there's all kinds of things in the way, and that's why you stick to the roads. But that's if you're not in a war.
Right.
And they are.
So this is Ministry of Defense.
Yes.
Latest defense intelligence update. Nothing has changed. Basically, the Russians' operational focus has shifted to eastern Ukraine. Russia's ultimate objective remains the same, committed to compelling Ukraine to abandon Euro-Atlantic orientation and asserting its own regional dominance. Not going to happen. So again, Phillips O'Brien, different thread. The upcoming Battle of the Donbass, where we might be looking at both the most predictable but also one of the strangest battles in modern war. As everybody seems to guess, after losing Battle of Kiev, this battle is now Russia's greatest priority. But it's predictable in that ever since Putin lost his big war, the total conquest and subjugation of Ukraine, he's been left trying to secure more limited objectives and take as much area as he possibly can. And what O'Brien is saying, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing and what they're up to. No mysteries here.
Okay.
Russian buildup seems to be mostly in the area between Izium and Kharkiv to launch an assault to link up with forces in the south. It's exactly where Ukraine is counterattacking. Putin seems to be telegraphing the importance of the battle, so there's a little surprise as we're awaiting this battle beginning. The problem is that the Russian buildup seems to be a real logistical problem, complicating their buildup. Okay. The reality of redeploying a defeated and exhausted army is now becoming apparent to those who talked about the Russians redeploying their key forces to the Donbass. It's been a week since Russian forces were almost out of Kyiv, and if the report below is right, the Russians are still a long way from having enough force for a big encirclement of the Donbass. Again, there's only 65 Russian brigade tactical groups, BTGs, and they started with like 130.
They're losing them. Where did you last put them?
The Russians might have concentrated 22 of them in the area near Izium, but that number hasn't been repeated. And if Russians do have 22 BTGs there, the rest of the fronts will be pretty lightly held. And if they're not there, it makes it easy for the Ukrainians to counterattack. That's the part that we don't totally understand. But it's like we're going to find this out in the next 48 hours.
Okay.
Right? So here's the weirdness, he says. There's no surprise. Think about that. It's like preparing for a major crucial engagement that might decide the war, and everybody knows exactly where it'll happen, which Russian units are being tracked, who's getting into position, The Ukrainians in their most recent update are basically describing Russian attempts to prepare for the Battle of the Donbass. Ukrainian forces are being prepared to meet an attack that they know exact location of.
That doesn't sound that unusual. I mean, that's the
Well,
idea.
The Russians don't know where the Ukrainians are.
Oh, well, if you have...
Because they're hiding.
Yeah.
In fact, it does seem the Ukrainians are being very methodical, limiting their offensive action, trying to retain forces and keep casualties down until a major Russian assault occurs. And in this way, the battle will be no surprise. All that matters now is what kind of buildup the Russians can actually do and what kinds of counter preparations the Ukrainians make. And we're seeing part of that in the Kharkiv breakout to separate Belgorod from the rest of Ukraine, from the Russian supply area down south. There will be no substantive negotiations before the battle, but afterwards the war could wind down. And that's why getting everything possible to Ukraine now is so important.
Oh.
It's clear where the attack will take place, and it's clear it could affect peace negotiations. So take advantage of the pause and the historic weirdness and the lack of surprise. And have seen a few people point out that fighting has been going on here for weeks, and that's true, but I'm thinking about the battle that would ensue after the Russians complete their buildup. If what we're seeing is all they can do, then you don't need clever Western analysts to guess what Ukraine needs to do. Long-range weapons.
Okay.
They've asked for air and anti-air to contest the airspace.
Yeah, well.
Ranged weapons to attack Russian forces. Armored personnel carriers, body armor, and tanks to protect their own forces. What they need is obvious, and they're saying it openly, and the only question is whether they get it. Now, our friend Marcos had a wonderful piece in the Daily Kos, because he's been following
and that's him.
This fairly closely.
Yeah.
And he does have a background in artillery when he was in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And he has something that I don't think has been cited enough. So I want to say it, and I actually quoted it in the Pundit Roundup. I don't usually highlight stuff that Daily Kos does on Daily Kos. I figure if you're there, you're reading it. But this was too good to ignore. And it's called, "It's Time to Appreciate the Massive Logistical Effort to Support Ukraine." And he goes through how much ammunition it needs to support, for example, howitzers and tanks, how much they weigh, and how difficult it is to move them.
Carry it. Yeah.
Okay. From the announcement, he says that the new deployment to arrival took 5 weeks when 100 Pennsylvania National Guard soldiers with 10 M109 Paladin howitzers and supporting equipment was sent to Lithuania. It took 5 weeks to get them there. Moving heavy equipment and tons of ammunition takes time. This isn't Amazon Prime. Russia's pre-invasion buildup took 5 months. And they had a robust rail system. And that's why it's a little frustrating to see people complain about how quickly America is arming and rearming the Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. We can concede, he says, that material isn't getting there fast enough. That has nothing to do with a lack of urgency. Logistical challenges don't disappear just because Ukraine is one of the good guys. Moving enough materiel to equip and sustain an army that has grown to 500,000 takes time.
Yes.
And he goes through, what everything weighs. 12 tons for this piece of equipment, 2,400 tons of armored personnel carriers if you're doing a certain number of them. A Hummer's 3 tons. The ammo's around 2,000 tons. It just takes time to do. And as we talked about last week, when it goes through Poland or when it goes through Slovakia, it still takes time to get delivered. So they're doing what they can do. You just can't do it that fast. So it's a race against time. And Ukrainians are, they go through that in a day. You give it to them, they use it. Now they need more. And so that's all happening in real time as we watch as this battle unfolds. Just fascinating stuff.
It is. I'm always fascinated by logistics and, the people who do, logistics for anything. They know it inside out, and they can tell you off the top of their heads how long it's going to take. And it's unbelievable what the answer usually is, right? How long will it take to get this to there? 5 weeks.
That's why it's so interesting reading the experts here. So Phillips O'Brien, one of them, says what they need is obvious, and they're saying it openly. The only question is whether they get it. By the way, if the Ukrainian claims of Russian losses in the Donbass are close to accurate, the Russians lost basically an entire BTG yesterday in a series of piecemeal attacks. And they keep doing that. And they won't be able to build up enough for a major offensive. They just take what they have and throw it in there. Okay. Today, Ukrainian armed forces are claiming about 2/3 of a BTG was destroyed in the Donbass. If they're right, They might be destroying Russian forces only a little less quickly than it takes for them to arrive. So those are 2 days in a row of pretty heavy losses.
Guess so.
Okay. And then let's turn to another piece which has been ignored. We know about it. It's there. It's the second front. And not as many people are talking about it. Phillips O'Brien. A brief thread on the political economy of the war and why what's happened since the invasion has also destroyed any strategy the Russians might have had. Clearly, the Putin government miscalculated in what sanctions Russia will face. This is dated April 16th. IMF stepped up with $1.4 billion in emergency financing to help meet Ukraine's immediate spending needs. Together with international partners, we're preparing for the massive reconstruction effort that will be required. So they're not driving Ukraine bankrupt. The West is supplying the money to keep Ukraine's economy going.
Okay. And
maybe a greater miscalculation was about how the invasion would basically politically transform Ukraine in NATO and European eyes to such a degree that they'll basically make sure Ukraine gets whatever it needs economically to function, freeing Ukraine up to fight the war. Ukraine's now asking for their economy to be kept afloat as they fight the war, and so far they're getting what they need. Much of the impetus to keep the Ukrainian economy functioning, not just providing military aid, comes because of the political fallout from the deliberate Russian policy of committing mass war crimes. This is politically meant that NATO and the EU can do this. And it means the Ukraine can fight the war with very different economic concerns than Russia. Russia has to worry about keeping the Russians happy after promising easy victories. Ukraine has a population already sacrificing and who will get major economic support. So again, a lot of this is the asymmetry in war, which is highlighted by a piece from Modern War Institute, which is at West Point, which basically says asymmetric wars aren't just asymmetric in capability, but also in stakes. The lesser force often faces an existential threat, and therefore summons a spirit that an invading army simply cannot match. Ukraine, as a nation seeing its right to self-determination in mortal danger, will always maintain that advantage against Moscow, and policymakers must also consider whether morale can be maintained, constructed, or cajoled. The other side of the coin is Russians losing on the morale front, which lots of reports around. But just to highlight the point of that economic blockade,
yes,
there's a report here that Russians are having trouble building and replacing their tanks. Russia's Ural Vogonzavod shuts down production. Will no longer be able to assemble any of the T-72 tanks, which is their main tank, or the newer T-90s. The reason, lack of imported components.
They're blocked at the Mexican border.
And Noah Smith says this is Russia's only domestic tank producer. It shows that by cutting off technological exports, you can actually grind Putin's war machine to a halt.
Yeah, you would think. Well,
it'll take time, but
that's the importance of domestically producing all the components of your military equipment. I mean, I don't think
would be a good thing in a war,
but yeah, you would want to do that,
particularly if your opponent up till now has been the one producing it.
Yes, right.
So
well, that's a real problem.
Russia really shouldn't be relying on Ukraine to resupply Russia with key parts.
They're probably not going to do it. I would guess
they're not going to do it.
No. Yeah, that's you can take that to the bank, New York Times. I'm an expert. You know, they're not going to just sell them the weapons to invade with. Come on, let's write. Well, that's. What can I tell you? They only have one tank producer too. That's
right, and for those of you playing Stratego and not Risk, Jack Detch reports Ukrainian troops have killed Russian Major General Vladimir Frolov, deputy commander of the 8th Army. Russian state media reports Frolov would be the 8th Russian general killed in Ukraine in 51 days of war.
8th Army, 8th one killed.
Western officials believe Russia has lost a disproportionate number of generals in Ukraine, likely the most of any modern military since World War II. Biggest naval loss since the Falklands, biggest disproportionate number of generals since World War II, because of failure to communicate orders to the front, forcing flag officers to have to do it themselves.
All the flag things, flag ships, flag officers, don't bring flags.
Right. So again, what I've tried to present today by using non-paper of record sources is give you an idea of how things are developing and how the fighting is going. All right. And, let's see how well the papers are doing. let's see. Washington Post. Missiles strike Lviv. Ukrainian forces refuse to quit in Mariupol.
Yes.
Lviv sees first wartime deaths. Mariupol's in the final siege. Ukrainian forces vow to fight till the end. And so you get the sense of, a few things here, a few things there. That's not so bad. That's, these are small counterattacks. It's not the major offensive that people were going through. But look at the New York Times. Their live story is Russia strikes hundreds of targets ahead of new offensive. The intensified attacks come amid growing signs that a new Russian onslaught in eastern Ukraine was getting underway. Here's the latest. I'm sorry, but that's not what I just told you.
No, it's not the same, certainly. And spending time on how difficult it is to get your kids into a Ukrainian preschool is not helping either. That's the usual New York Times focus.
Right.
But they're not
so,
really.
Again, they do a wonderful job with the humanitarian stuff.
Why do they think all that
But
is
the
happening?
military analysis is just lacking, and part of the reason why, I think, is their sources. They don't have the expertise to do this, and they rely on sources that are, kind of iffy and both sidesy and don't want to commit.
What are the
And,
sources even?
they don't want to go on record as saying, this is not really going well for the Russians because they don't want to look bad in case something happens. Fine, but that's not really informing the readers what's happening here.
I'm not certain I understand the reasoning, the motivation to not report the war.
And I don't think they're getting it right and I'm getting it wrong. I think I'm getting it right and they're getting it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you consider the possibility, but everybody else appears to. Well, I mean, those attacks did happen. They launched those attacks.
Yeah, they're accurate. They're not giving you inaccuracies. It's about framing.
But why?
Well, we talked about framing, at the end of last week on Thursday with James Fallon's piece. How newspapers and media frame things is vastly important.
Of course.
And these are choices made by the editors.
What is the reason? I mean,
don't know.
Yeah,
I think they're just trying to defend their "we got it wrong" sources.
Oh,
that's the only thing that makes sense to me. I don't think that the New York Times is pro-Russia.
They don't. I mean, I hope not. But
no, I don't think they are.
They're not doing a very good job.
But why are they doing it this way? I don't know. I think they're trying to set the stage and the table for their readers. But again, they present it as if it's an inevitable Russian onslaught, which is going to be effective. And so far, that's the opposite of everything we've seen in this war.
It was probably not a terrible guess at the outset, but very quickly it became obvious they're really not up to the standards we thought they were up to in the Russian army. So what's the problem with saying?
Well, again, as the analysts are saying, as they watch the two different sides, do their thing in Ukraine, one side is making adjustments, and the other isn't.
Yeah.
And some of the sources of information about what's going on in Ukraine are making adjustments, and some of them aren't.
Yeah. But that would be a great way for them to jump into the sports analogies or something, right? Look, halftime adjustments are being made on one side, and if not on the other, then who is likely to win? I don't know. Well, we'll find out one day whether they change their minds or just continue on. And I mean, I guess is there a lot at risk? Like, people aren't going to say, the New York-based readers aren't going to say, well, I felt misled about the Ukraine war. I'm switching to. But I guess
where are you supposed to switch to?
Well,
you could switch to
Twitter and
Twitter and social media. You get a better idea what's going on.
I guess you could go there. You could just subscribe
you can listen to
paper.
us, but I'm just talking about what the experts are saying.
All right. Well, I'm not certain who they think they're
I don't
helping.
claim expertise here that many people have way more than I do.
Yeah, well, we just read them. That's all we can do, folks. I don't know anything about Ukraine.
Well, the other thing we can do is pick your sources.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, what can I tell you?
It's just the whole thing is odd.
What if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong?
O'Brien was right when he talks about this whole war being really strange.
Yes.
How it's developing, the fact that it's all there in plain sight, and yet it's still pretty strange how people choose, and it is a choice, to cover it.
Okay.
With a lot of things that haven't totally been explained here.
There's a lot.
Is this done from the point, let's say the New York Times, is this from the point of view of the business people who are looking to invest in Russia and want this to end on terms that at least will allow them to go back and reinvest?
I don't know.
Is that what they're doing?
What do they care, really? I don't know. I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
It's
We'll
really
have to unravel
puzzling.
it at some point afterwards.
It makes
Maybe
you think.
I won't be able to guess before it's over. Well, we'll, I guess, continue to read the New York Times advisedly and take their humanitarian coverage for what it's worth and use it as a counterpoint to show how poorly they're doing on the other stuff.
Right. Here's War on the Rocks, for example. Different source, National Security Insiders. The tank is dead. Long live the Javelin. Right? I mean, if you're counting on your massed tank pitched battle to win it for you, maybe not. Maybe everything's just like the end of the battleship, the end of the aircraft carrier at some point, if anti-ship missiles wind up getting the advantage. Same with the tank. Now, simply because these large platforms are incredibly expensive and the countermeasures are incredly cheap.
Yeah.
That's really what happens here. So you can overwhelm the defense if you can just produce and get enough of the anti-large platform devices here. And we're seeing that play out in real life.
Not surprising, and I feel like I've absorbed that from I don't know what, whether from the news or coverage of other wars or the movies or something. They always will tell you.
Remember we said the other day, if you're commander of an aircraft carrier, maybe I should get another line of work. I know, I'll be a tank commander.
Not going to work. No. Yeah, Uber driver, you have a better chance. But okay, well.
Anyway, that's it for today. I hear the music.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll check in with you again on Wednesday.
We'll see what happens.
I bet. So, okay, thanks, Greg. Take it easy. We'll see you in a day or two, and see you on Twitter before then. All right, don't drive.
It always distresses me when I turn to trusted sources to find out what's going on and find that, you know what, you're doing a terrible job.
It's bad news.
Your war coverage is as bad as your politics.
Yeah. Someone will have to write, when they finally write a book about why they did it, then in 2 years we'll read the excerpts of why they reported that way.
I suppose. Anyway, take care, and I'll see you on Wednesday.
You. All right. See you then. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. The war in Ukraine is over for today. They're ready to pack up and can go to sleep for the night. Don't do anything else until we're ready to cover you again tomorrow or possibly Wednesday. There are many things going on here in the United States as well. The weekend news cycle is picking up again, and I think maybe it has a lot to do with maybe now is the time when all the tell-all books on the former administration are being published, and of course investigations from various circles coming to fruition and bringing people into court and revealing more. So the former guy and his circle forcing their way back into the news cycles, and that means chaotic weekends again, which is not terrible. It's in terms of providing content for the show anyway. It's kind of a good thing. Let's see if we can work our way backwards into all of this and let you know what caught my attention over the weekend. Let's see. Domestically, politically speaking, I saw twin stories that were similar, and therefore I said, oh, look, that makes it a trend. There's two of them, so we got to report on that. First, they're twin stories, so I can do them both at the same time. Both Marjorie Taylor Greene and champion idiot Madison Cawthorn are screwing themselves up with their fundraising, apparently. They both have reported, a negative take in the last... Did a quarter just end? Is that why we're having reports on this stuff? The Daily Beast has a story on Marjorie Taylor Greene reporting her first fundraising loss, and I have Among the many headlines on the story, the one from Raw Story, Madison Cawthorn reveals fundraising woes as Democrats try novel strategy to unseat him. But essentially what's going on here is these two have been fundraising, like gangbusters, because that's all they do. That's all they concentrate on. And all they do is, whip up a fan base and then run around and collect the money. But true to form, Marjorie Taylor Greene making poor strategic choices along the way. She's was, I guess, taken in by the allure of raising, being able to put up large numbers in fundraising. But in order to do it, she's hiring very expensive fundraising consultants who take a large percentage of what gets raised and keep it for themselves. And to this point, it's been able to sustain her. She can report things like, I've raised $3 million. Now, it cost me $2 million to do it, so really I've raised $1 million. But the way the system works, you get to say, I raised $3 million, and that makes you sound like a superstar. I mean, $1 million is pretty good. Don't get me wrong. I'd like to have it. I mean, I wouldn't want to spend it on a campaign or anything. But, these days, $1 million is, well, that used to make you a superstar in terms of if you're running for a backbench House seat, you're golden. But now, it's middling. I mean, honestly, it's terrible news, really, for our political system that it costs $1 million to run for the House successfully. And that happens fairly frequently, that people will spend that kind of money or raise that kind of money. But she was raising $3 million, and in the hands of a more capable person, of course, she wouldn't be a backbencher anymore. I mean, she's kind of not. She's a big star and all, but she doesn't occupy any positions of actual authority or power in the House. And usually, if you're raising that kind of money, you could start rocketing up the leadership ladder by passing that money around and making friends. And, one, she's not going to do that, and there's never inclined. She's not that kind of person. And two-thirds of the money is being burned along the way trying to raise more. So apparently now she's finally hit the wall to where, where she's actually spent more than she's raised, I guess, maybe for the first time. Marjorie Taylor Greene reports her first fundraising loss, says Roger Sollenberger over at the Daily Beast. She's one of the biggest fundraisers for Republicans in the House, but to kick off 2022, she actually spent more than she took in, which I think that was what people were expecting to see when she started launching these weird, I'm going to do a national tour with the other one, Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn and Matt Gaetz, and we're going to go around doing fundraisers and rallies and stuff. And it's like, well, after a while, that people start getting tired of giving you $5, $25, whatever, and it starts to dry up. The campaign committee for Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene reported on Friday that its first net loss since she was elected, posting a $314,000 deficit over the first 3 months of 2022, while additionally revising previous contributions totals down by more than $100,000. About half of that loss is represented in fees to, and this is interesting, usually you're paying your fundraising consultant, half of the loss, $314,000, so $150,000 or so, is fees to Donald Trump's top January 6th attorney. They share an attorney, amazingly, and a security detail that she hired. Which security detail did she hire? The one that protected Kyle Rittenhouse during his trial last year. So she's very into that sort of symbolic thing. I'll burn money by doing things, that I can, my fans who are dumb will be excited about hearing things like, I use the same attorney as Donald Trump. I'm using the same security force as Kyle Rittenhouse. So, she's got this fame fetish, and so she's wasting her money that way. While Greene has always traded steep fees for slightly higher returns, she's always managed to come out on top until now. Last quarter, she sprung a hole in the bucket as her campaign committee, Greene for Congress, spent about $1.38 million in a quarter, while only taking in $1.06 million in donations. Fundraising costs alone wiped out 3/4 of those receipts. Green, one of the top fundraisers in the House, has deployed expensive digital fundraising operations in the past, and reports have dinged her for it, pointing out that the fees give the lie to an inflated small dollar contribution stream. Last quarter, however, MAGA world's leading lady bet big on direct mail, sinking more than $400,000 into printing, postage, and associated expenses. When that money was added to consulting, list rental, and digital fees, Green for Congress spent more than $735,000 on its fundraising efforts. Now, that will pay for the entirety of a typical campaign for Congress, usually. But that's just what they spent, what, in a quarter? On fundraising alone? No other expenses? Donuts? Whatever? To make matters worse, the same day the campaign filed its new report, it also filed 3 amended versions of previous reports from last year, admitting that the committee had overstated contributions by more than $100,000. Now, you're counting money. I don't see how you make these mistakes, but whatever. The campaign currently holds about $3 million in cash on hand, which is, that's great for them, which represents a net gain of about $900,000 over the last 12 months. Green also spent big elsewhere this year, most specifically for personal security, racking up about $140,000 in expenses. Almost all of that went in 3 monthly payments to a Knoxville-based executive protection company called the Kagro Group, K-A, capital K-A, capital J-O-R, one word, Kagro Group, which also handled security for Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse during his trial last year. For Green, who prior to the 2020 election had received protection free of charge from members of the Oath Keepers anti-government militia group, this is an extraordinary surge in security costs. Last year, it was mostly Democrats who took advantage of the Federal Election Commission's post-insurrection ruling that elected officials can hire bodyguards with campaign funds. That year, Senator Raphael Warnock, also Senators John Ossoff and Mark Kelly, shelled out hundreds of thousands of dollars for personal protection, while Green reported protective expenses just north of $12,000, nearly half of it for an electronic security system. That's less than 10% of what she paid the Kagro Group last quarter. It's not immediately clear why Green hired the new firm. Asked about the expenses, which first appeared in late January, a campaign spokesperson told the Daily Beast, "I'm not going to get into details about her security due to the sensitive nature of it." How much does it cost? Yeah, even that they won't tell you. All right. A spokesperson did, however, cite an uptick in threats to the Congresswoman, including the arrest last month of a New York man who had made threatening calls, several, to Green's D.C. office. Our staff has reported over 20 threats to Capitol Police in the past week, the spokesperson said in a text message, along with a link to Green's response to controversial recent segment, and I don't think it was controversial, on Jimmy Kimmel Live. That's one of the threats she's protecting against. Jimmy Kimmel's going to make jokes about her. I believe the threat was somebody should slap her, like a reference to the Will Smith thing at the, oh no. It's not really a threat on her life. It's a threat, but not really a threat on her life, unless she's got an eggshell skull. But anyway, the spokesperson added that Green also received a significant amount of threats in January surrounding the one-year anniversary of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Ironically enough, many of Green's own colleagues blame that attack partially on her rhetoric, which they say empowers violent elements of the right wing, because it does. They're right about that. A few days after the January 6th anniversary, Green suggested using guns to defend against Democrats. So, live by the sword, die by it, I guess, unless you can pay $120,000 a quarter for security. Ultimately, the truth is, do you want to hear her stupid language? She said them on Sebastian Gorka's show, and then I hate to use this language, but Democrats, blah, 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 they're very dangerous, etc. Rita Katz, executive director of the Site Intelligence Group, SITE, which tracks extremist groups, told The Hill that those comments that she makes, and others like them, carry weight. Some lawmakers are indeed a source of threats. That's right. Comments from figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene are regularly shared and converted into rallying cries for some segments of the far right. And that's why I keep saying she is essentially a QAnon assassin with a member's pin. It's extremely dangerous to continue to give her access to the House floor, but nobody knows what to do about it because they haven't expelled her, and it's unlikely that they'll be able to muster the votes to do it as long as she has the support of Republicans, and they're just going to have to sit there and put up with it. And I guess eventually when she acts out, then they'll finally be able to do something. But it'll be too late for somebody. Why do I think she's finally going to act out? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's all performative, and we have to hope. That's our only hope, is that it's all performative stuff. But I don't see how you sit there and proclaim profess to believe the things you say you believe about Democrats, all the accusations that they're making, all the horrible accusations that they make for political reasons. If she's a true believer, and maybe she's just acting, but if she's a true believer, I don't know how you sit there and think that all of your colleagues in Congress are guilty of these horrific crimes against children, and you never act out on any of it. Which, I don't know. What can I tell you? Either she's a huge danger and we should be, watching her backs at every moment, and she's going to snap one day and kill somebody. Or, there's no chance of this ever happening, but her fan base, comes to realize, why haven't you shot anybody yet? What kind of a wimp are you? We should replace you with somebody who's going to promise to start shooting up the House floor. And I'm sure there's somebody in that district who will run on that basis at some point, I guess, if she ever loses her grip of terror on the district. So, who knows? Madison Cawthorn, in the meantime, has similar problems. What does Ross Story have to say about them? Bob Brigham gets the headline on this one. Madison Cawthorn reveals fundraising woes as Democrats try novel strategy to unseat him. Was that the suing to get him thrown off the ballot as an insurrectionist? Let's see. Controversial Representative Madison Cawthorn revealed fundraising woes when his campaign finance reports were made public on Friday. Big day. That's why this is happening. Cawthorn reported spending more money than he raised. And after accounting for his debts, had a net of only $115,575 cash on hand. There's a lot of, it's nice money. Used to be okay. And in a safe district, that's safe Republican, it's not a bad start. It's no $3 million, but the reports show his campaign spent $443 on Chick-fil-A. So, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a tremendous amount of money, but if it was all for him. Anyway, $1,371 on Papa's. There's no apostrophe here. So it's not like a possessive of Papa's, but P-A-P-A-S. I don't know whether that's just a grammatical error. Papa's beer? I don't know what it is. And $2,560 on Amazon, which could be anything, but I thought he hated big tech or whatever. Anyway, Cawthorn's re-election efforts were complicated by his accusation that Republican members of Congress engage in cocaine-fueled orgies. That'll make it difficult to raise dollars from your friends, I guess. He should be giving out money, but he doesn't have enough to repair those relationships, but he doesn't have enough to work with. Senator Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from his state of North Carolina, and also Republican State Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. Berger or Berger? I don't know how he says it. And State House Speaker Tim Moore, all three of those fellas are backing State Senator Chuck Edwards in a Republican primary against Madison Cawthorn. That'd be a good idea to jettison him. On any given day, he's an embarrassment, Senator Tom Tillis said of Cawthorn, so that's nice. Democrats, of course, don't like him either, and that's no surprise. Shall we give a plug here? Some Democrats are trying to use an unusual strategy to try to defeat controversial Republican U.S. Representative Madison Cawthorn. They're urging people to vote in the Republican primary. Mo Davis, maybe you follow him on Twitter, I do, a Democrat who ran against Cawthorn in 2020 and lost, is urging Democrats to temporarily change their voter registration to unaffiliated, and under state law that would allow them to vote in either party's primary, according to the local news down there, WNCN-TV, to give them the credit for it. Davis thinks Cawthorn is vulnerable in the primary. What I've seen is his support is eroding, particularly with the latest cocaine and orgy stuff, he explained. April 22nd, if you're down there, April 22nd is the deadline to change one's voter affiliation in North Carolina, if you'd like to play that game. So, it would be not a bad idea to get rid of him. He's terrible. The sooner he's gone, the better. Same mechanism isn't necessarily available to get rid of Marjorie Trader Greene, but maybe she'll get rid of herself by setting all of her money on fire. All right. Many other things, of course, to round up. And let's see. There's so many things waiting in the wings that I don't even know what to highlight most. I guess a lot of people spent the weekend reading through the reports about the texts from Mark Meadows' phone from Mike Lee and Chip Roy, but we spent a considerable amount of time on that on Friday. I don't think anything really new, no new direction on that discovered over the weekend, I don't think. But at any rate, somebody did bring something up that I thought was of interest because, which is related to this. Mike Lee, of course, I was calling his judgment into question. It's always a fine thing to do with Mike Lee, honestly, but the texts were really revealing. Like I was saying on Friday, the fact that one, he's on board with there was probably enough fraud, we can reverse this thing early on, and then he's recommending Sidney Powell, who's insane, and then in an effort to make it look like, no, I'm actually, I can see she's nuts. I'm a serious person. I'll recommend instead John Eastman. He's also nuts, but not quite as nuts as Sidney Powell is. But two terrible calls there for Mike Lee. And then the third terrible call is when he finally gets set to jump ship and says, I can't back you because, look, I've tried and tried, but you're just not providing me with the ammunition that I need. The evidence, the proof, the examples of fraud that I can point to and feel confident that this is a real claim. They're just not forthcoming. I can't do it. But then his lack of judgment here is he thinks you better shift gears because no Republicans are fine, upstanding people with principles. They're not going to back you in your push to reverse this election without the evidence that I've been asking for. And that shows, again, a remarkable lack of understanding of the political situation for a United States senator. I mean, it's a nice thing to be that naive, I guess, but, wake up and smell the coffee. But then there was no awakening because over the weekend the reports were, where did I see this one? I'm going to have to probably pull this up from the Twitter feed. But somebody, I think without a link too, I must have just wandered into the middle of their thread, was featuring another of the quotes from this text conversation in which Mike Lee essentially says, he finds himself when he jumps ship. Here it is. I'm looking at the tweet from Greg Nunziata, who identifies himself as the president of Rock Spring Public Policy and co-founder of ProLegis, and a Philadelphia lawyer, all interesting. Interesting, as a Republican as well. Former Senate staffer to Marco Rubio, and I don't know who that is. The Senate Republican Policy Committee, yes, and John Thune, and the Judiciary Committee. So, establishment credentials and all that. But I guess he too, I guess, amazed at Mike Lee's lack of judgment. He has this tweet. Mike Lee having sads that POTUS, Trump, anyway, didn't think he was doing a coup enough. So I guess he's a never Trumper himself, maybe, Nunziata. Anyway, the quote from the text thread is, I've been spending 14 hours a day for the last week trying to unravel this for him. I think this is Lee texting to Meadows about Trump. I've been spending 14 hours a day for the last week trying to unravel this for him. To have him take a shot at me, this is what happened. At some point, Trump says, now you're not going to be on board just because there's no evidence of the fraud. You're a rhino. I hate your guts. Screw you. I don't remember exactly what he said about Mike Lee, but apparently Trump attacks him because he's not cooing hard enough for him anymore. And he says, look, I've been working 14 hours a day for the last week trying to make this work. To have him take a shot at me like that in such a public setting without even asking me about it is pretty discouraging. Boo-hoo. I mean, I have to agree with Greg Nunziata here. That's pretty pathetic. And again, just evidence of horrific misjudgment of the political landscape. Backing Sidney Powell, backing Eastman, insisting that they should get into the White House and run things when they're both bananas, and then saying, yeah, you know what? Actually, on second thought, this whole thing is pretty stupid. And Republicans will never back you because they need evidence, because they're evidence-based people. No, they're not. They're not. And you're completely wrong about that. And over 100 Republicans will happily go along without the evidence. In fact, in the full knowledge that you've tried to produce the evidence and couldn't, and it's driven you away from the effort, that they know you bailed. And then when Trump finds out you bailed, he attacks you, and then you're like, I can't believe Trump isn't loyal to the effort I put in for him this last week. The second you turn against the guy, what can I mean, unbelievable for Mike Lee to be caught by surprise like this. The Twitter comment, I love the leopards eating your face meme, explains everything. I'm thinking about Mike Lee opening Christmas presents under the tree and opening a leopard. Hooray. I love leopards. Like, again, you have no idea who you're dealing with. The guy was president for 4 years and campaigned obnoxiously as hell on the platform that I will eat your face. And Mike Lee never, ever got it. And still thinks he's special, too. Like, but I'm Senator Mike Lee. I knew he would eat somebody else's face. I just didn't know he would eat. Yeah, right. Well, Mike Lee is about as, I guess, he thought he was the smartest guy in the room. And it turns out he might be the dumbest, which is incredible and a major achievement. Congratulations. All right. I mentioned Eastman in taking another shot at Mike Lee. And the fact that I did so in such a public setting is probably a huge disappointment to him. Another thing I discovered over the weekend, sort of at random, the tweet of the Twitter entity known as Clearing the Fog. You can find Clearing the Fog at clearing_fog. The underscore, I guess, stands for the, and it's not there now. Who had this piece of information. I did not know this, but it looks like there's some evidence provided here. John Eastman, jerky as he is also the father of, I think we all knew this now from the other reporting, but now demonstrably involved earlier than we thought, I guess we should say, in the fraudulent electors scheme. How early? November? October? No, earlier than that. 20 years ago. 20 years ago, this tweet says, before SCOTUS stepped in, the Florida GOP was planning to use it to nullify their citizens' votes if Al Gore won their election. And Eastman was helping them plan it. And then a thread ensues. It's illustrated with a photo of a still frame from C-SPAN's footage from campaign 2000 of John Eastman appearing before, I don't know what, this is the Florida legislature. He's at it looks like he's in a speech mode or a testimony giving mode. And that's him, I think. I don't know what he looks like. The Cryon says it's him. Maybe it's all fake. It's all a deep fake. But apparently Eastman floated the idea with the Florida legislature back during the 2000 recount that maybe one of the things you want to do in order to foreclose the possibility that Al Gore could reverse the results of the Florida election and therefore win the presidency is the Republican state legislature should reconvene and enact that plan. Let's, by legislative act, withdraw our electors and substitute in Republican electors no matter what happens with the election, which, it's the same thing that they were planning to do this time. And same, you would hope the kind of thing that normal courts would say, no, you can't do that. You can decide ahead of time to appoint them if you want to, but then you don't have an election. You can't have an election and then just throw out the results if you don't like it. But apparently this was what he was doing 20 years ago. As the 2000 election went into recounts and state Supreme Court battles in Florida, the Republican Party was very concerned that Gore might win, and they threw the kitchen sink at stopping it. SCOTUS, though, eventually stepped in, overriding the Florida Supreme Court to stop the count. So they didn't end up needing Eastman's plan, but if the SCOTUS had not stepped in, the Republican Party in Florida was preparing to invalidate the results of the election. On November 29th, they invited speakers to a hearing where they discussed the possibility of an, quote, alternate slate of electors. And they brought in a ringer, and that ringer was John Eastman, as it turns out. At the November 29th hearing, citizens urged legislators not to hold a special session. Several lawyers warned that the legislative selection of presidential electors would set a dangerous constitutional precedent. The Republican-controlled legislature saved the final word, though, for John Eastman, who testified before them on November 30th. Eastman, when asked for his credentials to weigh in on the Electoral College, didn't need to be very convincing. Apparently, all he was able to manage for them was, well, this isn't even an answer, but the words that he used afterwards, what are your credentials? Well, the Electoral College is part of that structural foundation that is part of the underlying principle and theory of our whole constitutional system. Okay, but that's not your credentials. After a lackluster introduction, Eastman begins his hard sell, condescending to the lawmakers, explaining that this is uncharted territory and they must be nervous but not to worry, because he was here to let them know they were more powerful than the Supreme Court. It continues, believe it or not, after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. There we go. Get that button working, please. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the, you know where you're going. Kagro in the Morning Show. What else would you be doing? There's no channels to turn, right? You're still here? Okay. Well, where were we? We were in the middle of reading the thread from Clearing the Fog, explaining that John Eastman has been at this fake elector thing for 20 years, which is news to me. Not surprising that a lot of these academic types stay on the same topic for their entire careers, and that's how they become subject matter experts. They do nothing but fantasize about these things and pretend they know what's going to happen. But for all the preparation, although maybe he's at the beginning of his career as a fake elector guy at this point. We don't know. So I'm kind of curious about it, but I don't want to play 2 minutes of the audio, but there's questioning from the Florida State Legislature. I'd love to hear how it's put. Like, did they really say, so what are your credentials to weigh in on the Electoral College? And he says, he defines, doesn't even really define the Electoral College. He just says, it's really an important thing. Yeah. And your credentials for commenting on it are what? It's important. And I like important things. He doesn't even really make that connection. But anyway, as we said, after a lackluster introduction, he begins his hard sell, and he says, look, I'm here to tell you, you can overrule the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, no matter what it decides to do, you can, as the legislature, you have plenary powers to decide how the electors will be chosen, and in his view, that means even if you choose to have an election settle that, if you don't like the way the election comes out, you can invalidate it and appoint your own electors, because you have the power to determine how the electors are to be chosen, and that power never ends. There's no fulfillment of that power and then the end of your power to do it for that term. I mean, it's an interpretation. I mean, what the language doesn't say, but should, I guess, is you have one chance to make the choice about how electors will be chosen for your state. And then when you make that choice by an act of the legislature, it's locked in until there's an act, until there's an act of the legislature that will supersede it, but that takes place prior to actually executing the plan that you put forward first. I suppose, and here's where there's room for argument and gray areas in the law, right? if I wanted to set the rule, it's, well, you get one shot at it. If you decide it's going to be an election, then it's going to be an election, and that's that. Well, supposing the next election is in, as it is in this case, in November of 2024 is the next time there'll be an election in Florida to determine, well, unless they change the law between now and then. The next time there'll be an election in Florida to determine who the members of the Electoral College from Florida are going to be. And they decide that now. I mean, they've already decided that, but whatever. They reaffirm the decision, or this is a brand new state, and they now say this. So I guess in theory, right, you could say, well, supposing in November of 2023, the legislature says, you know what, we changed our minds, or we changed the composition of the legislature. You know, a new party has taken control here, whatever the excuse is, but it doesn't matter. They now say, actually, in 2024, Florida is going to determine the composition of its delegation to the Electoral College by vote of the legislature. We're going to appoint them. That's valid. They can do that. And if they do it in November of 2023, I don't think, as dumb as it is, and as much as we'd prefer or we're used to having the elections, I don't think that you'd be able to invalidate that and say, well, no, you only get one shot at it. And in November of 2022, you said we were going to have an election. And then in 23, you changed your mind. That can't work. No, it can work because the election hasn't taken place yet. I think where most people would jump off of that is they would say, supposing you say in November of 2022, the legislature says you're going to use an election in 2024. And then November of 2024 comes around and you have the election, and I don't know, is Joe Biden running for re-election and he wins Florida's electoral votes? That's the point at which you would probably say, if the legislature were to get together and say, we changed our minds, we're going to have an appointment of the electors, everybody would say, no, you've already had the election. I would suspect, and this is how you test these things, right? In discussions before the courts, appeals courts, or I guess you could have it in the trial court, but, Anyway, but you might ask, well, okay, but what about if, I don't know, when's election day 2024? It doesn't matter, but do you want to know? Let's look it up. We'll look at the calendar. And let's see, 23, 24, there's November, so the first Tuesday will be the 5th. So November 5th, 2024 is the election. So on November 4th, 2024, can the Florida legislature say, you know what, we're going to appoint our electors, no election? Well, maybe not, probably not. People have already voted, absentee ballots have been mailed, the people have done early voting if they still allow that in Florida. All right. Well, what's the first day of early voting or the first day that you can get your absentee ballot? Is it in October? Whatever it is. Arbitrarily, we'll say it's October 1st. So on September 30th, can you cancel the election and say we're going to have an appointment? Well, I don't know. People have, have come to depend on the... But that would be much less clear. It's entirely possible, I guess, before any of the mechanisms have been set in motion. And whatever obstacles you want to throw up there. Well, they've already spent money printing the ballots or spent money training people for the vote counting and polling place supervision, etc. All right, well, what about the day before any of that starts? So at some point, you're going to have to draw a line. But most people, I think, most normal, rational people who aren't, let's say, I don't know, Republican-appointed members of the Supreme Court of the United States might say, well, we think that once you have the election and people start voting anyway, then it's too late to change your mind. I think that's where most people would come down rationally. But John Eastman's theory is it doesn't matter because none of that is in the Constitution. What it says is they can determine the methods of what do they say? The method of selection. I can never remember. I probably could remember, but I've convinced myself that I can't. But you get the idea that you can decide how the electors will be chosen. And you're really supposed to do it once and stick with it until you change it, in ahead of the next election. But Eastman says, it doesn't say that anywhere, so I don't see why you can't change it afterwards. Now, that's crazy on a practical level. But again, even though, we've been over this ground 100 times, even though almost everybody if they're willing to attach their names to the position and state it in public and stand around and defend it, has to admit, once you say you're going to have an election and you do have the election, it would be crazy to allow them to just say, I don't like it and throw it out. Because that's not an election. That's not the way it works. But Eastman says there's no words that say it can't be. And I only have to convince 5 people in the world that should be the way we interpret things. I mean, it could be. It isn't now. No one wants to. Everyone says they're against that. But if I get the right 5 people to say, dumb as it is, we agree. And if they don't want it, but that is very dumb. I don't want to have to say that. I don't want to have to explain that. Well, don't explain it. Just do it. Like the shadow docket, just no opinion. But I voted, right? And if you only have to get 5 people, and what if those 5 people were Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and I don't know, who's our 5th one these days? I'm already forgetting. John Roberts, probably would say no to it. Neil Gorsuch, and then you have your 5. Oh no. But again, we've been explaining. But that's dumb. They never would. They'd be so embarrassed. Yeah, they might be. They still are, apparently, at least on some fronts. But if the election were really at stake and we were at that point, like Florida 2000 or like this last election, and they could really change the outcome. And as dumb as it is, if we say it, it'll happen, and Trump will be president, or whoever we want will be president, then they would do it. And then Eastman, standing out here looking like an idiot 20 years ago, standing out there last year, yeah, and looking like an idiot, all of a sudden, I was right all along, and all of you were wrong, and you just didn't know it. And you don't even have to be a legal scholar, that common sense feeling that if you hold an election, you can't just say, no, instead of having an election, we're going to do something else. That's common sense. You don't have to be a legal scholar to know that that's wrong, but it's wrong anyway. Why? Because this lineup of 5 extremely partisan people who we all pretty much believe will do whatever they want, whenever they want, said, let's do that. And then that's all there is to it. But anyway, the real point of the Clearing the Fog thread was that he's been doing this for a long time, and we didn't know that. We didn't. But Clearing the Fog knew. So where were we here? Let's see. After a lackluster introduction, Eastman begins the hard sell, telling everybody, don't be nervous. I can tell you how to do this. Interestingly, it says, Eastman cited McPherson v. Blacker, the case of McPherson versus Blacker, implying that it provides precedent for everything that he was about to tell them that day. And according to Clearing the Fog, it says, of course, that isn't true. I don't know what's in McPherson versus Blacker, but a screenshot of the Wikipedia entry is up here. It did confirm the plenary power, but that wasn't the argument that he was there to make. So let me just see what the screenshot that's here from Wikipedia. McPherson versus Blacker, an 1892 case, decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in October of 1892. The case concerned a law passed in Michigan which divided the state into separate congressional districts and awarded one of the state's electoral votes to each winner, or to the winner of each district. Okay. The suit was filed by several of these electors chosen in the 1892 election, including William McPherson, against Robert R. Blacker, the Michigan Secretary of State. It was the first Supreme Court case to consider whether certain methods of states' appointments of their electors were constitutional. The court, in a majority opinion authored by Chief Justice Melville Fuller — you forgot all about Chief Justice Melville Fuller, didn't you? — upheld Michigan's law and more generally gave state legislatures plenary power, or plenary as some people like to pronounce it, over how they appointed their electors, right? The court held that Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution also constrains the ability of each state to limit the ability of its state legislatures to decide how to appoint their electors. So that's the origin of the theory to which we ascribe, that the legislatures can, in fact, choose how their state's electors will be appointed. And they can and they do. At the moment, everybody says they're going to have an election. And it's the basis of Eastman's theory that, they can just appoint new electors. Well, no. Hold on a second. They can appoint electors ahead of the game, but they can't have an election and an appointment. That's not likely to be workable. And as is pointed out in the thread here, the fact that there was such a case that gave the legislature's plenary power to determine how to appoint their electors is kind of beside the point. If the point is, well, they can make that selection multiple times and they can even undo prior selections that have been announced at any point, even after the fact. That's not in there. While McPherson did affirm that state legislatures have full control, or plenary power, as they say, over how the state decides to choose its electors, it absolutely does not state that they can suddenly and unilaterally decide to change those electors in the middle of an election. That's probably true. Well, we think so. After the fraudulent electors scheme was attempted in 2020, this was clarified by multiple people, including the Republican House Speaker of Arizona and the Attorney General of Pennsylvania in SCOTUS filings, and they are screen capped and provided here as evidence. Of course, you heard that from me as well. Eastman's arguments to justify this scheme have no merit, and they never had any merit. Of course, he knew this even in 2000. There's more video of him trying to sell it here, which is why he used bluster and a barrage of confusing jargon in an attempt to pave the way for the scheme to proceed under color of authority. How much bluster and jargon? 2 minutes and 14 seconds worth of it. I'm kind of interested in hearing it, but maybe it's better listened to at home on your own, because there's multiple clips of 2-minute pieces here, so you should take advantage of your time later and listen to what he has to say. Eastman closed his blustery statement that day by forcefully telling the Florida legislature that no one could stop them from what they wanted to do with their state electors because they had a plenary, quote, judging ability, whatever that's supposed to mean, in all matters elector related. This may seem like ancient history, but it is important for at least 2 reasons. Let's see if there's one beyond the obvious here. First, it tells us that the Republican Party's contempt for democracy has nothing to do with Trump, and so it will remain even after he's gone. That's always a good point to make. David Frum, apparently, quoted here saying, he tried to tell us this in 2018. He would know. Of course, he was George W. Bush's speechwriter. And a clip here from one of his Atlantic pieces in which he says, if conservatives become convinced that they cannot win democratically, this is in 2018, they will not abandon conservatism. They will reject democracy. Turned out to be a good call, especially for 2018. Secondly, it gives us more insight into what Eastman and Republican Party organs are still doing today. Only a month ago, Eastman was in Wisconsin pushing legislators to use their power, their quote-unquote power, to declare that their election was, quote, illegally certified. Again, last month. That's this year. And here is a link to another tweet from Clay Berg saying, John Eastman's full speech from yesterday in Wisconsin is available to people to look at here. I guess he only had 3 minutes to do it. And like in Florida in 2000, clearing the fog continues, the GOP threw the kitchen sink at 2020. The fraudulent electors scheme was only one piece, and that was Eastman's baby. He led them to believe it would work, and people are likely going to face prison time for it. Ooh, fantastic. I don't know if that's the case. He needs to prove he was, quote, right, which I like to say he needs to prove that you were all pre-wrong. Here's more from Eastman at the Wisconsin legislature, included in an attached video. And then an addendum at the end of the thread, adding links for sources that weren't already included online. The link to the C-SPAN video of the November 29th Florida hearing is given. And then, of course, link to the Bush v. Gore decision and the timeline of the Florida 2000 election and all that ensued from it. So, very interesting. And, of course, other people pointing out he's not the only repeat player. Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and I think Neil Gorsuch all had a hand in as Republican operatives and as Republican attorneys down in Florida in 2000 in the court proceedings there. So, how do we know that they won't be inclined to just vote however comes out to the advantage of Republicans in whatever situation they find themselves in, especially if it's, a presidential election? They've made their careers that way. It's a good question. Let's see. Other things over the weekend that people either sent my way or that crossed my path inexplicably otherwise. Let's see. There's, I'll scroll through my KITM hashtag column here because I know a couple of you have sent these things along. Here we are. Yes, Rebecca Romans sent this to me, and I think maybe one or two others also sent it my way. But an explanation for when we discuss all the various states in the last couple of days, we've discussed it over the last few weeks, all the states passing more or less identical legislation, whether it's, something mirroring Florida's Don't Say Gay bill or the quote-unquote anti-CRT legislation, much of it identical or very similar. Anyway, it seems to be off of the same blueprint. And whenever that happens, we tend to assume that it's ALEC. And I did say on the show, this kind of bill just doesn't really fit usually, I think I said it, but I meant to say it, but it doesn't really fit the usual ALEC interest. I mean, the interest ultimately is giving control to Republicans, so it works in that sense. But these things were poorly done and poorly written. And ALEC's work tends to be of slightly higher quality usually. So I was a little, and I hadn't seen any reporting either that said, yes, it's from ALEC. And there are people who have an eye on ALEC all the time. They would have raised the alarm. And I guess the reason that the alarm wasn't raised that it was coming from ALEC is that someone else is raising the alarm that it comes from elsewhere after all. So let's take a look at that. We have, are they both about the same thing? Yes. Rebecca has forwarded both of these. First, there is the thread from one Chrissy Stroop, who I don't think I know, but I think Stroop is Dutch for syrup. Isn't that like Stroop waffles, right? Well, anyway, Chrissy Syrup has this note for us. Senior correspondent for Our Dispatches and columnist for Open Democracy as well. She writes that the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation's Project Blitz, about which I know nothing, is the most significant coordinated Christian dominionist legislative onslaught you've never heard of. I haven't. You're right. And she points to Fred Clarkson, who I have heard of, providing a rundown on this over at religiondispatches.org. But then she basically tells us, she goes on to say, here's a list of the legislative initiatives currently supported by Project Blitz, and there's a Google Drive doc here. I guess that she's sharing with everybody. Oh, and there are little tiny things. 2018 religious freedom measures. So a nice big, this guy's a whole chart here with clickable things, clickable links to all the different bills. But the point is that apparently it's not ALEC, it's this Project Blitz thing instead. Rebecca also sends along a tweet thread from Genevieve Williams. Genevieve's profile apparently not immediately available to me. Okay. A DNC member, among other things, but a former nominee for, I guess, the Missouri Congressional District 7 at some point. So former candidate is probably the most relevant background here. Much of the legislation, she says, that you are seeing in state houses throughout the country comes from one place. No, not ALEC. Project Blitz, a Christian nationalist bill mill. It's difficult to say bill mill, but you get the point. They've been orchestrating a takeover of local government for a generation, and it has largely worked. That's bad. Here is an explainer on their goals and, in retrospect, some of their achievements. I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce you to, there's Chrissy Stroop. C. Stroop, C_Stroop, if you're trying to find her on Twitter, who is one of the leading minds and voices on Christian nationalism. And it leads us to that other thread. I began with that one. I should have done it in reverse. But that sends us to the one about the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation's Project Blitz. But Genevieve then continues and tells us a little bit more. Voter suppression is a key piece of their 50-state offensive, but is concentrated in states with larger black populations, because that's who they want to suppress, and specifically red states with minority CDs, congressional districts, in an attempt to circumvent the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Let's see. Didn't start here, but for my fellow millennials who went to mostly red state public schools, you probably remember See You at the Poll. See You at the Poll. Not the polls, but the poll. What poll? That, well, I'll tell you in a minute. It was led by the National Council on Bible Curriculum in Public Schools, which is not supposed to be a thing, but they have a national council on it for some reason, along with other movements to try to get prayer back into the schools. Students were invited to come to a prayer circle at the flagpole, which presumably is actually outside of the school, but symbolic in many ways of exactly the sort of place where you shouldn't be having prayer meetings. But students were invited to come to a prayer circle at the flagpole. Yes, teachers were allowed to participate. The Christian nationalist backing wasn't obvious to us at the time, but the nature of challenging the laws and norms was. Here is a list of their endorsing organizations. There's a link here at BibleInSchools.net. Two fun ones are the Family Research Council, who we know about, and the Concerned Women for America. We've heard both names. If you are fortunate enough to be unaware of the Family Research Council, the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, explains their various problems with them here, and there's a link. Remember, this is interesting, remember the Drag Queen Story Hour bill? Remember when that was a craze? Oh my God, we got to stop that. Here is a gathering of the Concerned Women for America in support of one bill at the Missouri State House that I stumbled onto during candidate filing a few years ago. Posted it originally on Facebook in 2020, and there's a link to it here. You may remember the wave of adding In God We Trust on what? On LE vehicles. On vehicles? Well, LE vehicles to me means low emissions vehicles. What, we put that on cars? What? But adding it in schools and on public buildings, that makes sense. But I don't know what LE, I must be missing the point of LE vehicles. But that didn't just happen. It stems from Project Blitz and Christian nationalism. Here she includes another Chrissy Stroop tweet here saying, yeah, this is exactly the sort of thing. One of the initial goals of Project Blitz, by the way, that I have in mind when I say that we're living in Billy Graham's America. The posting of In God We Trust in public schools is not politically neutral. Now, Genevieve continues, there was plentiful evidence of this movement in the January 6th insurrection. If you don't think this movement has reached your community, think of the Trump is my president and Jesus is my Lord signs and shirts. And guess what? It still hasn't reached my community as far as I can tell, but I'm sure it has touched many. Let me continue with Genevieve here and see if I can finish it up before we exit for the day. They are behind numerous anti-trans bills, from the bathroom bills that got trounced way back when, to adoption bans, to don't say gay bills, to attacks on health care. Families are feeling these states with their feeling. It says feeling, but I think she means fleeing these states with their children in order to protect them from this harmful legislation, creating, in essence, domestic refugees. The hugely negative effect of these laws on the mental health of trans youth is a crisis unto itself. Don't think I forgot the heartbeat bills and personhood bills, because she didn't. Those come out of a different bill mill, Americans United for Life, but they are absolutely connected. Read more about them and their connections to extreme abortion bans here at the provided link, which brings us to anti-CRT bills, which really aren't anti-CRT bills at all. An accurate retelling of American chattel slavery and colonialism isn't CRT. CRT focuses on the way our laws have been designed to oppress. I can see why they'd be threatened, though. And though it was weird that professional ladder climber and insurrectionist fanboy Senator Josh Hawley kept using his questioning of Justice Jackson to bring up CRT. Well, 100% on brand. He was getting sound bites and sending dog whistles. They support refusal of care laws, which will allow healthcare providers to put their personal beliefs before patient care. It's exactly as terrifying as it sounds. This is meant to be overwhelming and difficult to track. We must stand in solidarity against these bill mills with everyone they target and show up for each other. Thanks given here to Chrissy Stroop here, who dedicates countless hours and unquantifiable emotional labor to exposing this movement and working to end the outsized influence in our government and our governance. Please give her a follow. And more there. So once again, Genevieve Williams and Chrissy Stroop on the case, letting us know about the history of these bills.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, yeah, well, thanks to them. Thanks to everybody who pointed that out, because I did wonder whether it was Alec, and if it isn't, we should find out who it is. And keep an eye on them. Next up, to keep an eye on everything going crazy around the country and around the world, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, following us as usual and picking up the slack for us as always.